Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey bestie, hope you're having an amazing day. The world is a better place because you're in it. You see what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts. You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. So hit the subscribe button and join us as we change the world by making our workplaces better. Got a real treat for you today. I am here with Mita Mallick. She is a DE&I champion. She's a business leader, author of a new book coming out called Reimagining Inclusion, and she's a top LinkedIn voice. So this is a big get for the Ethics Experts. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation.
So I've been following you on LinkedIn forever. I mean, you just have this, you're such a great storyteller. You're somebody who's so authentic in all of your posts. It's so encouraging. I've seen your following skyrocket. I'd love to hear just kind of a little bit of your journey in this DE&I space over the last several years, how you've been able to get your voice out there and what led to this phenomenal book. I mean, this is going to skyrocket. I can just feel it.
Oh my God. Thank you. I'm getting goosebumps. I have been, as I talk about in the beginning of the book, which thanks for taking a look at it. I know you have an advanced copy of it. I've been chasing inclusion my whole life. And so 4 years ago, I started writing the book. I had a lot of career journals, which are different than journals. I write by processing. I would write down a lot of experiences I was having at work, things I was observing, highs and lows. And so I was able to go back and pull together the book in terms of an outline and Reimagine Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Workplace, and saying the quiet parts out loud about what holds us back from making meaningful progress in this work. But part of what I talk about is, yes, I'm good at writing, but writing is half talent, half discipline. And through LinkedIn, I've been actually able to hone the craft of writing and actually see what resonates at the moment with my audience and what I may want to include in a book or in a future book.
So have you always been a writer? Have you always been journaling throughout your whole life? Or I've just never heard about that career journal, but I feel like that's such a great, it's probably a great way to process things, you know?
It is, yeah. Actually, my story is when I left undergrad, a friend of mine at the time, one of my best friends, found me an agent. I wrote 3 novels that have been unpublished. I had an agent. I wrote a novel every year and I'd get all this feedback, but I was really young and stubborn. And so I wouldn't change the book, but I'd write another book. And then at the end of that, 3 years went by and my agent dumped me in a really mean way over email. I won't say her name because she's a very famous agent. And then I was like, what do I do with my life? I love to write, but I can't make money off of it. And so then I ended up applying to graduate school to get an MBA. But for me, writing and marketing, storytelling, is very, oh, wow, I could do marketing, right? And so then I ended up down that path. I then wrote a 4th novel. I don't make this stuff up. Didn't get that published. I wrote a nonfiction proposal, couldn't get that off the ground. And then I think it was years later, it was probably my father's sudden death in 2017, where you start to, nothing like grief that starts to kind of reset the course of your life to say, what am I waiting for? What am I so scared of? Right. So I started again. But I share that because I'm not an overnight success. And I want people to understand and know that I have been writing for a long time. So all of a sudden one day I didn't have a book that was auctioned off and hit a bestseller list. So I was, no, that's not me. Right. So this is the real journey.
So the path to success is write a series of novels and then go get an MBA and then figure it out. Yeah.
But it's just that I just wasn't going to stop, or the universe wouldn't let me stop.
Yeah. And so what is that drive in you to get this out? I mean, I find that the best writers, it's they have something in them they have to get out. My friend is on a podcast, and it's this story that he's been getting out for years and years and years. And it's like a drive or something.
It is. It's something inside you. I feel more whole. I feel more healthy when I write. I write 20 minutes a day. Some of it will never see the light of day, and that's cool. But I just enjoy it so much. I think part of it's how I process and see the world too. And I wrote the book to make impact. Someone said to me, well, you actually don't have a business. I have a full-time job. I work at Carta as the head of DE&I there. She's like, so why are you writing a book? Because you're not going to sell any workshops or services through it. I'm like, whatever happened to just writing a book to impact and change people's lives? But the publishing industry has changed. And there's no knock to people who have businesses and books. I think that's a great tool. I'm just not one of those people right now. And so that's really interesting too. I'm like, yeah, exactly to your point. It's like, I just I have many stories to share and I want to share them with the world.
And there's a lot of those stories in this book, and I want to get to the book here in a second, but I'd love to hear your path from MBA in marketing to now DE&I leader within an organization, and how that sort of prompted you to, push this message out through LinkedIn. And, becoming a LinkedIn top voice is a big deal. And I think you're deserving of it because you're super consistent. And again, your storytelling is, phenomenal.
Oh, thank you. For me, inclusion has always been a driver of the business. I was a marketer for many years. I still consider myself a marketer, but always consumer product goods. And I always wondered, like, whose story gets told and why? Like, who gets to be on screen and why? I remember being at a color cosmetics company working on this, like, incredible line of eyeshadows. They didn't work on my skin tone. And I said to the director at the time, I said, well, this doesn't work on my skin tone. Can we add more pigment? And the response was like, we add more pigment, the cost goes up. No one's going to buy it. And I said, well, how do you know that?
Right. Well, you're like, I'm not going to buy it,
Yeah, I'm not going to buy it. But it's always, no matter what I did, I always encountered these moments at work where I didn't feel like I was represented in what we were selling. And so that always stayed with me. And so when I had my first opportunity to do this work, I thought, well, I could really be a change maker. People come into this work from all different ways. Some people have grown up in HR. Some people have a legal background. For me, I was from the business and I have a different view. I can't unlearn the things I've learned as a business leader or marketer. And I think that's been advantageous coming into the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So you told a story in the book about kickball and how so many of us feel like outsiders in that kind of a moment. In my whole life, I felt like an outsider. My dad is a Cuban refugee, and I just always felt different and, excluded in some ways.
Yes.
And so talk to me a little bit about like what, this is going to sound stupid maybe, but like what is inclusion and what does everybody get wrong about it? I think that story was really kind of boiled it down to me at least.
Well, we all chase inclusion, right? This idea of inclusion and what it means. And we don't talk enough about what it means to feel the opposite, which is excluded. And so, God, you said kickball and I kind of whiplash because I still have trauma. I hate work events that require any sort of athletic ability because I can run fast, but that's it. I'm not coordinated at all. So can run and that's about it. But I have a story that you remember from the book, which is about elementary school and always being picked last for the kickball team. And so what I want people who are listening to think about is anyone listening right now, you can stop and recall a time when you were excluded. And I don't care who you are. And it could be in your childhood. It could be currently at work. Especially at work, it's like, we weren't invited to that meeting. It's my project. Did you hear these people went on a golf retreat? Did you hear that so-and-so had a drinks event with the CFO? Like, there's so many moments, big and small, that happens. And it's such, God, it hits you here, right?
Totally, yeah.
And it's such a crappy feeling. And so like, why would we ever want anyone to feel that way? We actually don't, right? Once we felt that way. And so that's where I think we've lost the plot, particularly when we think about this backlash happening right now in diversity, equity, inclusion, because you asked me, like, what is inclusion? Inclusion is I work for you. I feel valued, seen, recognized. My contributions matter. And I feel like I belong. And that is the biggest retention tool we have right now. Because once I feel that way, like, maybe they come around with another offer for $100,000. I might consider it. I'm not going to really consider leaving for 10, 20, 30,000. And sometimes there's no amount of money. Like, belonging is priceless,
totally.
Right? Sometimes there's no amount of money that can lure someone away because I found my place.
It's so, you mentioned this backlash, and I think it's so interesting, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it, but everything you just described to me is so, basic, common sense. We're in a knowledge work economy where we are our work. The assets aren't these massive machines, they're human beings. Yeah. Why is it turning into a bad word for an organization to prioritize people feeling like a part of it, feeling belonging? It's bizarre.
Because we're weaponizing it. And you go back to LinkedIn, you go back to social media, a lot of what gets the most likes is fear, right? The extremes that gets likes. And so it's very easy to shut something down when you can other it and keep it at a distance, right? Like, You seem different to me. You have a different life experience. Okay. Just push that away.
Right.
Right. It's woke. It's anti-woke. It's political. It's apolitical. One of the things when I talk to leaders and they say to me, oh, Mita, I don't know if we should talk about this. I don't know if I should post about this. I don't know if I should write that company letter. It seems just too political. And I always coach leaders to say, well, isn't it through the lens of privilege that we can say something is political? Black Lives Matter, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-LGBTQ legislation, anti-Asian hate crimes. I would venture to guess that somebody who identifies with any of those groups would not say it's political. They would say it's human rights and it's a matter of life and death and hurt and harm. So it's like through the lens in which we can label these things. And so that's where I think the fear, it's very easy to scare people into pushing things away. It doesn't work, I believe, in the long term, but certainly short term, it works.
You mentioned this otherism, and I've just found it like, even in a group of 3, my son is 10, and like in a group of him and 2 friends, there's always one that's kind of on the outside. So it's like, it's almost like in us to have this like tribalism and this otherism, and even within an organization, you see it across departments.
Yes.
It's like a perpetual like struggle to like knock down these walls and remind us that, again, I'm going to use the analogy of an organization, but like, if marketing and sales are kind of letting some of that otherism creep in, we have to remind ourselves that like, hey, we're all wearing the same jersey. And, that can translate out into, otherism between different groups. But at our core, we're all human beings. Like, how do we overcome this propensity for otherism, like on a macro level, Well,
the question is what are you so afraid of?
Yeah, right. I think that is the question.
What are you so afraid of? What are you so threatened by? The marketing and sales one, being a marketer, is a great example, right? It's like, what are you so afraid of? What are you so scared of? Because if you can get to the root of that, because usually when I can coach leaders through this, there's something that's happened somewhere along the way that has shut them down. And so the job is and sometimes they've locked the door and thrown the key away, and you're trying to get them to reopen the door. But something has happened somewhere along the way. And it's one experience with one person, personally or professionally. And this is where stereotype comes in. And so they're like, close themselves off. And so how can you actually get them to process the fear and move forward?
Yeah, I guess that fear leads to this kind of caged animal response where it's like, which is kind of interesting because we can have sort of mental assent to all of these things and say, yes, I agree with that. But then like in a firefight or in the, in one of those hot scenarios, people revert back to these sort of more base responses. And to your point, I think it is kind of fear-based. So having that kind of a conversation is great. And, how does an organization build that, that muscle so that when that is creeping up, we can stop and pause and like step out of it and observe it to diagnose what's at the root of it,
I think that's a great question. There are some people that can be coached and that they should have an opportunity to stay. And then there's other people that shouldn't. And I'm going to just say that really boldly. One of the myths I talk about is, we protect the a-holes because our businesses wouldn't run without them. And sometimes we give too many chances to Mita because I work for you and you came to my daughter's wedding.
Right.
Known you for 30 years. We were in undergrad together. So no matter what people say about Mita, you have this blind spot. You cannot believe the feedback that's being given. You can't believe that 5 women of color left her team in 10 days. Where there's smoke, there's fire. You can't believe all the feedback, and you just keep giving her chances. Coach after coach after coach, different assignments, different teams, and the end result is still the same. And I say, and I don't say this is very famously said, hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. So if I am so hurt and I lash out continuously at work, it's not coaching. It's likely deep therapy I need, and I likely need to leave the organization and figure out what's next for me and need to stop hurting people in the company.
I'm glad you talked about this one because, literally all of these are so great. They're so smart. What I really love about the book is that you can literally open it up to any chapter and you frame out the myth really well. But then it's not just a bunch of pontificating. There's actionable steps on things that like leaders can do to examine their blind spots and examine how they might be inadvertently contributing to a lack of inclusion in their organization. For the a-holes one, I just find that so interesting. And I'm sure that I'm like guilty of all of these at some level. You know what I'm saying? But the a-holes one, I just find it interesting because it's like, yeah, but you don't know them. It's like, yeah, I know they're a little rough around the edges, but what would our business do without them? Or like this person has, become indispensable. And I think it's, this is a broad brushstroke and that's all I seem to paint with. But it seems like again, it's kind of coming back to fear. I can't, I'm so scared of this person leaving. Well, in actuality, people can leave at any point in time, right? Like people are not compelled to be in an organization. And like very few organizations are truly at risk of like dying because one person leaves, like beyond a certain size, And yet that fear of the future or the fear of, the change or whatever just allows us to compromise. And, what I found interesting about your answer just now was how important it is for leaders not only to be open to self-examination, but also to be open to feedback from other folks, which means that we have to create environments where people feel comfortable speaking up about what they're experiencing.
Absolutely. I mean, let's be real. If I'm your chief marketing officer on your executive team, I'm not the one running the business. The people in the business are running the business.
100%.
And if I am an a-hole, the pattern I see is that they're also very good at managing up. Right. And sort of creating this narrative that they are indispensable. And it's often, because we're human, our personal relationships that get in the way because we have a history. And I have gone with you to many different companies you've started, right? And like our families know each other.
Right.
And so there's a lot of courage that takes to say, actually, you need to move on. Like this can no longer be. I've seen it play over and over and over again. And so the question is, it's like, wow, you're willing to risk all these people for Mita. Well, all these people will walk out the door, but you'll keep Mita. Well,
and I used to work for someone that was like this. I mean, people would be walking by at like a happy hour and who didn't know each other, and they would overhear the one guy's name, and they would become fast friends because of their mutual hate for this individual.
Yeah, it's just bonding.
Yeah,
right?
You could bond over like this common enemy.
I've been
But like the next layer of it is there was so much value destruction from this one person. And it was like his boss would never do anything to get rid of him because he had, he was like Rasputin, you know what I'm saying? Like speaking in the ear of Tsar Nicholas, like controlling this empire. It was wild.
Amazing.
But it's like this leader had blinders on to the real damage that this individual was causing. And when this guy ended up moving on, it was crazy. It was like everything just started running more smoothly. And it was frustrating for a lot of folks. And to your point, like a lot of people just left because it was so toxic, but, it's crazy that, sometimes the eyes aren't opened or maybe they never get opened. But like the point is things didn't all fall apart because this, there's no linchpin to your point in an organization. It's
absolutely
the collective. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
So what, I don't know which one of these to jump to. I mean, there's so many good ones in here. I really liked this initial story. The Black Lives Matter story. So the myth number one is, of course, I support Black Lives Matter. Why are you asking if I have any black friends? And if you don't mind, I'd love for you to tell that story because you kind of captured that moment really, really well. And I thought that, I'm just like picturing myself there and how you let those sort of silences really kind of convey the message. Tell us that story and what that individual was getting wrong.
So this is the diversity tipping point, which was coined by Diverse Engaged, period of May 2020, when companies started to say, Black lives do matter. And it was in that moment that a leader, which is not uncommon, people want to share and post on social media, this white leader, he was trying to find an image around Black Lives Matter. And so the image he found, I was like, this doesn't make any sense, but I'm asking him questions and I asked him a question that was something along the lines of, how do your Black friends and colleagues feel about this? Like, have you talked to them? And then he said, well, why are you asking if I have any Black friends? And like stormed out the door. It's like, I didn't ask that question. And it goes to the point that we are doing this work backwards.
Right.
We are chasing inclusion at our conference room tables. It starts at our kitchen room tables. It starts in our home and our communities. We're spending billions of dollars in the US alone on diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, speakers, programs, workshops. And guess what? It's about, at the end of the day, who I spend my time with outside of work, and the relationships I have, and the lived experiences I've access to that are not my own. Because again, if I'm on your C-suite, I'm a CMO working for you. And actually, guess what? We have strong diversity representation in the marketing team. That's great. But the question you need to ask is, am I fit to lead that team? Am I fit to lead that team? And that's what I think we really need to be talking about, how so many of us in this country are still self-segregating. And if we're doing that, how do we actually show up at work and expect to lead diverse teams?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good point. Yeah, I mean, if you're self-segregating, how can whatever you do not be somewhat synthetic?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're pulling from all of these.
Well, you're pulling from media.
Yeah, right.
Film, TV, books. And not that books aren't great. I've written a book, right? But what I'm saying is that if you only have one or two sources, you start to stereotype communities, whether you realize it or not. If you don't actually think about, right, let me get access to a lived experience that's not my own. I've been very open, like in my journey in this work, I actually realized I didn't know any veterans. Like, I didn't know anybody who had served in our country. And I was like, that's kind of like, oof, I'm going to say that out loud. There's like embarrassment and shame in that. But then very quickly ended up volunteering for a nonprofit that was helping veterans who were transitioning back into corporate, transitioning for the first time into corporate spaces. And so like, I was like, I have to make an intentional effort here.
Right.
Like, this is important to me to get to know individuals who have served our country. And so you have to just say those things out loud. And when you can, then you can actually start to, okay, what can I do about this?
Yeah, it's like you can like admit that there's some deficiency, and then once that is admitted, then you can start to take those actions. And those other data points we just talked about that folks pull from, what's lacking in all of those, which inevitably obviously leads to a stereotype, is that there's no conversation there. And what I've found is that if you're willing to ask questions and you're coming, if you're like evaporating away any defensiveness or fear, back to your point, and you're coming with true curiosity, I think people are super forthcoming about what their experience is, and you can start to have that journey, or you can start to embark on that journey of like understanding, which is really kind of driving the empathy that allows us to build authentic inclusion in our organizations.
Absolutely. You're not tokenizing, you're not shaming, naming, blaming. You're building a true friendship with somebody who is from a community you'd identify with, and you build trust in that relationship. So when you have questions and things come up, you can go back to that person. And that's not to say, because I am your South Asian friend, I know everything about women of color and South Asian women. That's not what I'm saying either, but it starts to broaden your worldview just a little bit. Yeah.
And, our workplaces aren't segregated. Our marketplaces aren't segregated. So we have to, again, if we're going to be, you could even get super like econ about it, or from a governance perspective, it's our fiduciary duty to employ the assets of our organization in the most efficient way possible. So then, thus, you have to understand who you're selling to or who's working with you and so forth. There's myth number 7 is we need more people of color in leadership. Let's launch a mentorship program. And so I do want to dive into that, but this one I thought kind of spoke to, like that sounds like many of these sound like really well-intending things, but there's some blind spot, and there's some maybe inherent bias or something in that. So, which then leads people with that other response, which you talk about kind of throughout the book, of like, well, people are just too sensitive. So let's like use that as this, microcosm of this issue that I think if we can, understand and unpack a little bit, we might be able to make some progress on,
Yes. I love what you just said, because every myth in this book almost is well-intentioned. That's the whole point, right? And in this particular myth, I have said very famously, and I get flack for it, I've been over-mentored and under-sponsored in my career. I will say that again, over-mentored and under-sponsored in my career. And what I mean by that is I wouldn't be on this podcast here with you today. I wouldn't have been invited by you and your team. Wouldn't be writing a book if I didn't have a lot of great mentors. Of course, I have amazing mentors. And they played a more important role in my life and my career. But sponsorship is different. Sponsorship is about having someone who is likely 2 levels senior to you in your organization. They have a large team, they have a large budget, and guess what? They're in the room when decisions about you and your career are being made and the doors are closed. And yes, that's happening. I was so naive when I started corporate America. I was like, that's happening? People are talking about me behind closed doors? Yeah, it's called talent calibration, right? And it's like Fortune 50 companies, the favorite thing to do, talk about. And so you've got to have, especially, oh my God, my biggest piece of advice is don't tie your fortunes to the one boss.
Correct.
I've had really great bosses and really not so great bosses. So you need other career sponsors. And so that is what I put forward in this book to say, particularly when it comes to people of color and representation at C-suites, boardrooms, leadership team. Well, wouldn't we have better representation if mentorship was working? I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah, good question.
In what form is it working? And then how is sponsorship different? Those are things to think about because I do think mentorship programs is like the catch-all. Oh my God, we're losing people. Launch a mentorship program.
Yeah, silver bullet.
We want to reward someone. Employee resource group, launch a mentorship program. We have a new L&D lead. Can you help us launch a mentorship program? It's like constant what I hear, throughout my career.
In my first corporate job, there was like an embedded forced mentorship.
Oh, gosh.
And I just couldn't find that to be any less valuable. It was such a waste. I heard, I was constantly told, this is absolutely true. I was telling, I would tell my mentors what my dreams were. And I was literally told to a person, I've had, 4 or 5 of them over the years I was there. That's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. So it's like, what? How? First of all, how
mentor is that?
That's what I'm saying.
A dream crusher?
Totally. I mean, that's what it was, and it was a real fuel. It turned into a fuel for me because I wanted to prove these people wrong. But I've always felt like I have to prove the world wrong or something like that. But to your point, that is such a dream crusher, and obviously, just that mentorship program. At least in my case, it wasn't super valuable for me. I mean, there were nuggets of things here and there, but I look back on it years later as kind of a joke, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so what's the answer there? How would someone of color, for example, get that sponsorship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my role, I've actually helped curate programs, sponsorship programs, match people up based on the work. And so this is my biggest piece of advice. This is not a Taylor Swift concert. We're not giving out friendship bracelets. And I'd be like, will you be my sponsor? That's not how this works. Right. And so how it works is, I'll give you an example back from my marketing days. You probably remember this example in Reimagine Inclusion, but I'm a senior marketing manager. You're my boss. You've said to me, hey, Mita, can you review for the last year the investments we made in media? I'd like to see what the ROI is, particularly for these channels. Great. Okay, who's going to be interested in this work other than me and you? And here's the big mistake I made in my career. Proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. My dad, rest in peace, would always say, keep your head down, work hard, stay out of trouble, you'll be recognized. So I always was like this with my head down versus oh, let me think strategically. Who else needs to know about this work? Who else needs to know about that work is probably the CFO or someone in the finance department. And so what that means is, depending on the size of the organization, it might not be the CFO, it might be a VP of finance. I'm going to put time on her calendar. I have this project that my boss has asked me to work on. I'd love to get your advice and input. So I come with prepared work. I get them excited about it. They ask me some questions. I say, hey, you know what? I'm going to put time back in 4 weeks because I want to come back with your answers. Okay, great. Go back again in 4 weeks. Wow. I really like how you put that together. I like how you answer this question. Actually, I have a team meeting in 2 weeks. Would you come and present at my team meeting? Do you see what I'm doing?
Yeah.
And so I buy, it's co-signing.
Totally.
Right? They feel like this is their project too. So guess what? We're in the room. I'm being calibrated. You present me. Anyone else have any feedback on Mita? All of a sudden, Sally, the VP of finance, is like, Mita should be promoted, and here's why. So even if you're advocating for me, which you would if you were my boss, sometimes it's not enough.
Totally.
One voice isn't enough. If you're a detractor, forget it. But if you're advocating for me, you're like, oh gosh, now it's easier to get me to promote it because Sally signed off too.
Yeah, it makes it easier for your boss, to your point.
Absolutely.
And what I like about what you're saying is it is a really high agency approach to managing your career path.
Yes.
And it's not letting the impediments in the world that are maybe structural or systemic or whatever you want to call it prevent you from achieving those goals. It's a really smart and tactful way. And it's not subversive and it's not underhanded. It's just smart.
About the work. It's 100%. About the work. It's not like, hey, let's get coffee and tell me about your career. Hey, let's get coffee. I want to speak at this conference, which I'm not saying is not valid. It's just different. And I also don't want people to take away that I'm telling you to get 10 career sponsors. I'm not saying that. You just need one or two.
That's right.
You just need one or two.
Well, and it's also, you said it's about the work, and it's really about bringing value and showing your value.
Absolutely.
And you had a post a couple of weeks or months ago about like how obnoxious it is, I think, of people saying, "Hey, I want to pick your brain," and that's like a taking. That's such a taking of value thing, and it's really relying on your altruism, which is fine in some cases, but that's not a sustainable way to build a career.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh my God, I get so much flack about that picking your brain post. But
really?
Listen, if I know you, you can pick my brain. The whole point is if you don't know me and you're asking for, can you come speak for free with your book? Can you do some DE&I consulting work for free? Can you? You're like, I actually have never heard from you before.
Yeah, and I also have like a life and I have a job and I'm writing a book and I'm writing.
And so I'm like,
I mean.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, I think I gave a really big heart to that post because that resonated with me. But why do people tend to lean on, I mean, it's just kind of a weaker approach that, hey, let's meet for coffee, or will you meet for coffee and tell me about your career, versus leaning into, a path where the catalyst or the focal point is it being about the work. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's easier? It's, it feels more secure. It's kind of showing your neck a little bit, or like, why do you think that is?
I think because, at least for me, I didn't think I had permission. You don't need permission. The company hired you for your expertise. So go help the company reach its potential and you reach your potential. And nothing that we talked about earlier, nothing that we do at work is alone, right? If you're in a corporation, it's a team sport. It's highly matrixed. And so your boss likely is, in most cases, going to be happy that you reached out to cross-functionals. In this case, it makes you look great too.
Right.
And so maybe it's because we're scared that we don't have permission. We should stay in our lane and
keep our head down.
He just asked me to do this, so let me just do this and get it done, versus, let me stop and think. The other mistake I would make too in an analysis like that, I'd spend all weekend on it, and then someone Monday morning would tell me, Bob also did that analysis. Like, he could have helped you, and you're like, what? But it's because for me it was insecure and not confident, and so I just would kind of stay in my little cubicle working in my lane. Yeah,
and I think that can be so frustrating, and it can leave you so jaded to kind of count on getting noticed. And I think in today's world, and maybe this has always been true, but I'll just say it seems at least true right now, that everybody, I don't want to say that everybody's so self-absorbed, but I just think people are like more stressed than they've ever been. It feels like everyone's super overloaded. We have notifications coming in across all these devices, and it's a lot harder to just naturally get noticed. You have to get yourself noticed, kind of.
Absolutely. I like what you said earlier too. It's the coffee conversation is safer. And showing you my deck is vulnerable because you might actually not like it. You might actually ask me to redo all of it. You might actually bring up questions that I hadn't thought of, and now do I feel stupid? Right. But that's work. That's how we get better as leaders.
Yeah, and you're going to have those thoughts regardless when you see it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yes.
And you can at least for me as a leader, genuine effort is really what I'm looking for first and foremost. And someone who's willing to kind of go that extra mile and, hey, am I getting this right? To your point, a business is trying to create value, and that's the sum total of all these individuals creating value in their little pockets of the world,
Absolutely. I used to also think all of these leaders were gods. Right? Like if I looked at them, it was like Medusa and I'd turned to stone. Like I was like, oh my God. Right. They're going into the executive room. Right. And you're like, no, they're humans just like us. they were once in my role and I'm actually making their jobs better by doing this work. So go reach out to the VP of finance and show them your work. They're probably going to be delighted. But we don't think that way because, oh, that person's too senior. Why would they be interested in what I have to say? I'm not adding value in the same way. No, I mean, let's get real. By the time you get to a really senior role, you're the orchestrator. You're the conductor of the orchestra. Like, you have enough expertise, but you're no longer doing the work. You're directing other people to do it. So of course they'd be delighted, I believe.
Yeah.
Any good leader.
That's been my experience for sure. And, you know, kind of to your point, everybody goes home and watches the same shows on Netflix. You know what I'm saying? Everyone has the same insecurities regardless of your age or what your status is. And I worked really closely with a guy who was worth like hundreds of millions of dollars. And I just kind of always thought like, well, at that point, you're a titan of industry. You're unflappable. And I mean, he was just a guy, you know, and he was a successful guy, but he was just a human and he had the same ups and downs that like we all have. And it just, it was really an eye opener for me. I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey from, you know, I have a friend from India as well, or his family, you know, I think both of his parents were Indian immigrants. And he was told the same thing. Keep your head down, work hard. And he got to the point where, you know, he kind of journeyed from that kind of keep my head down type of a mentality to, you know, more boldness and being able to speak up or something, you know, like to make his voice heard. And it sounds like you've kind of had that same journey. Can you share a little bit about when your eyes were opened and what sort of was the catalyst for you to, you know, metamorphosize from that sort of rule of thumb to where you're at now?
My Indian immigrant parents gave me a lot of great gifts. They didn't always serve me well in corporate America. Like a crazy work ethic. I could probably outwork you, but I didn't work very smart. Right? Didn't work very smart. Didn't understand politics or managing up. Didn't think that was important. Thought my work would speak for itself. It's like making a piece of content, watching it in your bedroom all day long. No one ever sees it, right? Never taught me to quit. You don't quit people, spaces, places. You don't quit projects. So here you are silently working on something where the company's priorities have shifted. So I can go on, but I quickly realized that a lot of these gifts weren't valued in corporate America. I had to think about it a bit differently. One of my very first memories in a corporate assignment was I joined this company, was in marketing. I was like so excited. It was like my dream job. And like, you know, when you feel like you're killing it, walking into work with the swag, I'm like, I love this job.
Sunglasses on.
Brand to work on. Yeah. And I'll never forget my manager at the time. And yes, I will be judgmental. He came over to my cubicle and he was wearing like the ugliest Hawaiian print t-shirt. I remember this, right? He's like, hey, do you have a few minutes? He pulls me into this conference room and he's like, we came out of talent review, you know, those famous talent reviews and closed doors. And he said, I just had some feedback to give you. You're a wallflower here. No one knows what you're working on or doing. I know the lights are on, but sometimes we wonder if someone's home, which I thought was interesting.
Yikes.
And then he said, you're never going to become a manager, never mind a director here. And this company hired people because they said, okay, I'm hiring you because I believe you can become a director at some point. And I was devastated because that feedback came from out of nowhere. And my friend Jill Katz.
In a Hawaiian shirt, no less.
Like it was print. It was like color print. I'm like, are we in Maui? It's like, what is going on? It was very interesting, but I'll never forget. It's like seared in my mind. And my friend Jill Katz says, you know, you give feedback with candor, courage, and care, right? And so there was a lot of candor and courage, certainly no care. And I was really devastated because I was like, I want to lead teams. I want to lead people. Like, this is why I joined. I want to create great campaigns and products and tell stories. And so after I downed a pint of Ben and Jerry's that night, I realized he was right. And that's oh, he was right. He was right.
Isn't that crazy that post-pint clarity?
Yes, the post-pint clarity. It's like, oh, because I give myself a day to feel sorry for myself. Give myself a day. This happened to me. Terrible.
It's not fair.
Oh, not fair. The world sucks. And you're like, okay, no, let's move on. You can do that for a day. But he was right. I needed to practice using my voice. And so I did that a lot. My husband will attest in our years of marriage, practicing in empty living rooms, in the shower, in the car, practicing using the sound of my voice, practicing talking points, practicing questions people might ask me, practicing a question I want to ask. I would even actually, if I had to present tomorrow, well, tomorrow's the weekend, but if I had to present on Monday morning, Monday afternoon, I might get there early before anyone was in the building. And I've done this and practice in the room.
Yeah.
Actually, I've gone in on a weekend. I know that's not, but I was so anxious about presenting. My friend and I once went into the building on a weekend. We were practicing each other's because just to get comfortable
Totally.
with
Feel
the space,
feel the
especially if it's a
space, yeah.
boardroom,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
if it's like a big boardroom, that can be intimidating early in your career, even now.
Yeah, even now. And figuring out a way to kind of deal with those nerves so that you can present well, not just a presentation, but just yourself, I think is super important. So good on you on that journey. It's probably a journey that you never get to the destination on. I don't, I got to believe, maybe Obama's, maybe this is a bad example, but like, you still got to have nerves at some point, you know? Like,
I think you do. You just channel them positively. Like it's the
Agreed.
nervousness that gets excitement, right? I mean, even now it's so funny. Even when I say present, no one presents anything in corporate America. You start to present and you get interrupted. You just facilitate a meeting. And so I learned that too. Recently, I was coaching someone who keeps getting the feedback that he's giving monologues. And I think it's because he's anxious and nervous. Like I really relate to that. You have a 20-page deck. You're going to get through one slide.
Totally.
And they're just prepared to like answer the questions. Because I would practice the 20 slides and I'm like, wait, what happened? You're like, no, but that's how it works.
Right.
You're not going to present anything. You're going to have to be able to field questions in the moment.
Yeah. And
you're going to have to know the material well enough that you can drive the conversation.
Exactly. And so to that sort of specific point, it's not about not having those 20 slides. You want that backup. You want to be able to speak to that stuff. But to your point, you got to keep it super high level and let that meeting go where the audience wants to take it. You know, if it's going to actually be effective, because it's only going to be effective to the extent that people get their questions answered or you guide them appropriately, you know.
Absolutely.
You give this example of our ad was not racist. It was simply a mistake. And you talk about the T-Mobile ad where they interviewed a bunch of white people about what's the word that that makes you think of T-Mobile, and everybody said ghetto, and everybody's kind of laughing about it. And then, you know, talk to us about that story, that response, and how that's kind of a great picture of this thing that we see happen all the time. And I want to also kind of tie it to this thing that kind of drives me nuts, where it's like, on July 1st, everyone's logos change. And on March 1st, everyone's logos change. And how do we build authentic, inclusive cultures versus like leading and resist the like temptation of just kind of greenwashing our way through this and, you know,
diversity washing.
Diversity washing. Yeah.
No. Yeah. So in that story, it's Sprint at the time.
Sprint, right.
But you're right, it is T-Mobile. They're trying to collect competitive, intelligent consumer insights about their competitor, T-Mobile. And so the CEO was famously, you can all look up the video, interviewing people on like a tour. And he says, T-Mobile, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? And someone says ghetto, and they're all laughing and ghetto, and they just keep going. Now, what ends up happening is the company ends up taking this clip and posts it as a part of their campaign. So they were closed door. I mean, they got everyone's consent to be on video, but they could have chosen not to show that clip.
Yeah, totally.
They chose it.
That wasn't a live video, to your point.
It wasn't a live video. It was part of their like focus groups, going around the world, going around the country to learn more about how consumers felt about their cell phone carriers. And so what ends up transpiring over social media is quite fascinating because they post it, the CEO posts it, then CEO, and people come after them. But the CEO comes back to defend it and then finally was like, oh, well, if you are upset by this, we're sorry. And you're like, what? And so I have just watched too many leaders in my time, whether I'm working with them or watching it in the marketplace, people just won't accept that they've caused hurt or harm. It's not racist. It's not sexist. It's not homophobic. They're being too sensitive, like you said earlier. And it's like, okay, well, what if we just stopped and accept that it's true? Okay, let's just stop and say, actually, okay, it is racist. Let that sit for a second. And so now what are we going to do about it? But that's the biggest hurdle, because then you think, why do these things keep happening in the marketplace? If we all paid attention and learned from them, then they wouldn't happen anymore. But they just, we'll pick up our phones today. There's probably something we missed that we could have included in our conversation. But and now with social media, it's 24/7 that we'll find out about some misstep in the marketplace.
Yeah, you said that it's it's interesting as people rise higher in an organization, and as that organization gets bigger, the level of like disconnectedness just seems to skyrocket. It's like they're so out of touch. And I love this example from that show 30 Rock, where Alec Baldwin's character is this. I talk about this all the time because I just think it's such a great picture. He's like this multi-millionaire CEO of this division, and he's like, how much could a gallon of milk cost? $40 or something, And it's like he's so disconnected. He like hasn't bought a gallon of milk ever. And I think as someone rises higher in an organization, they do start to kind of believe that like their stuff doesn't stink and like they can kind of do no wrong. They start to believe that they are the smartest person in the room. And in doing that, you just get so calloused, your empathy level, it has to drop, right? Like how else could you maintain this lie to yourself that you're infallible? I mean, it's bizarre.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say personally, as a marketer, I was raised to be arrogant in a corporate America who convinced me that my job is to know you so well that I can surprise, delight you with the product or service you didn't expect, enhance the quality of your life. But my job is to know you really well. And so when you say that a piece of content is racist, then that's questioning my capabilities as a marketer, right? And so that's where, because I actually don't know the history of you and your community as well as I thought, because in a time when people are more stressed than ever, shortcuts abound. And so we're not actually, do we really have the insight and do we really know? Like I'm always baffled when go back to the statistics where we know that Procter & Gamble has said there's over $5 trillion of spending power with the multicultural consumer. And that's not including veterans, individuals with disabilities, LGBTQ+, like so many dimensions of diversity. You want to sell authentically and purposely to the Black community. You have no Black representation on the team, not within and not just the team, but the ecosystem of agencies and partners. And you're like, what? And I'm not saying, and by the way, one Black person is not enough. Don't expect me, for example, as the woman of color to be the voice and the check the box for everything. I don't know how all women of color think. You need to have enough people that can really support and vet the idea, make sure it's connects with the audience.
Well, think back to that Sprint ad. I mean, it's like, okay, everyone is taking all these clips. Someone put them all together. That was obviously viewed in a room before it went out.
Yes.
And either there wasn't representation enough there, or there wasn't an open enough culture, an open enough speak up culture for someone to say, guys, we have a little bit of a blind spot here. Like there's just like a ton of failures along the way to allow that to happen. To your point, it wasn't like a live video that he was just like live streaming or something, there was like intentionality behind it.
Yeah. And what I love about that example is I'll use myself as a LinkedIn top voice. I run my own account. People ask me that, right? If there's spelling mistakes, if I got it wrong, it's on me. I'm sorry. I'm tired. Doing my best. Mom, day job as a mom, day job at Carta, and then the book. But it's me. It's one person.
Right.
And so your example is, wow, there were so many people that these things pass through in large organizations. It's not just Mita writing in the morning while she's drinking coffee what she feels and hits post. There's so many people.
Right.
And that's what's fascinating. You're like, you all saw this and it still went out.
Yeah, or they just said, I don't feel comfortable enough to like question the God of the company or whatever.
There is. Or I talk about the whispers are the loudest.
Yeah.
I've been in many spaces where someone said something, they were perceived to be junior. They were shut down. We had enough sample size. That's not what the consumer told us.
Shut up.
We're talking about basically basically.
Do you think... So I want to talk about two things. I guess one really quick one is I love this concept of like arguing the opposite. It's such a great way if there's any kind of a conflict or you want to even do some self-reflection to say like, well, I have this view. Can I sort of objectively argue the opposite and pretend that thing might be true? And I've never done it and not had some kind of a revelation. Why is that so hard for folks, you think?
Because it's questioning what I believe to be not true.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm not right. One of the myths that I talk about in the book, which is really interesting, it's like, I'm all for diverse talent as long as they're good.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that one too. Yeah.
So you think, do what you just did, your exercise, which I love. I'm all for diverse talent as long as they're good. Okay, so I would say to you, if you said that to me, are you all for non-diverse talent as long as they're good? Do we ever use that language? Right. And so you start to like just question the things we say every day. And you're like, So you hire me, go through this example, to be on your exec team. I'm leading a troubled part of the business. I'm the first woman of color on your team. And for all the reasons it didn't work out, I leave, move on. Are you more or less reluctant to hire another woman of color after me?
Right.
Okay. Now, another scenario. I'm going to pick on Jim. I don't know a Jim. I really don't think I know a Jim. So I'm going to use Jim as an example. White man joins your exec team. You have him lead a troubled part of the business. Doesn't work out for all the different reasons. He moves on. Are you more or less reluctant to hire a white man again? And so these are the things, like you say, we have to ask ourselves, like, the different scenarios and sometimes question our thinking.
Yeah. And it's, which again can kind of lead down to this, like, you have to have the ability to like analyze yourself if you're ever going to uncover any of these biases. Because I think like we all, I mean, if I'm like, I want to go on a date with my wife, I have some picture of that in my mind. Or I want to hire this person, you just inevitably have some kind of a picture. And how do you make sure that you're not solving for that picture versus solving for some other more sort of thoughtful, criteria list or something? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
What was the other one? We just touched on two, and again, this should have been 3 hours, this thing.
No, it's fine. We talked about our ad wasn't racist. It was simply a mistake. And then I brought up, I'm all for diverse talent as long as they're good.
Yeah. And so I think it was in that chapter, I'm probably getting this mixed up, but what I see is a lot of organizations where this DE&I title is several layers down. And it's like, how does that not inevitably lead to, color washing? What did you call it? Diversity washing or something?
Diversity washing. Yes. Diversity washing.
Yeah. So like, what would you tell an organization, an executive team who at least claims to care about this? How would you tell them to construct this type of a function in terms of like where it reports and the power and so forth, and how to measure like success and stuff like that?
Inclusion is a driver of the business. So when you build it into everything, you just can't then cut it off like we're seeing now.
Right.
Like all these chief diversity officer roles being terminated, individuals being let go. But what if you built it into how you view your workforce? You think about, like, I think about from a people standpoint, like building it into recruiting, talent management, performance management, promotions process, performance improvement plan process. You should have an inclusion lens into every people process you have, checks and balances, right? Second, we talked a lot about brands, products, and services. Who are you serving and why, and who are you ignoring and why? And if you tell me there's 0% growth to be had, you're not looking in the right places.
Yeah, right.
Right? You're not thinking about who you have an opportunity to serve authentically. Third, supplier diversity. I think about that a lot. I've worked for many a Fortune 50 company where it's like we write the same $5 million check to the same agency. And you ask yourself, like, the lost opportunity of showing up in that ecosystem, writing checks to different people. I love to be someone's first customer, particularly Carta. That's meaningful.
Totally.
If I can say Carta was the person's first customer, imagine how many more doors that opens, right?
Yeah.
It's like amazing. And then the fourth, it's like values. You can say you're going to stand for values. It goes back to diversity washing. Be careful to post something on Instagram that you're not going to follow through on. That, I always say your employees are your forgotten consumer. Right? Your employees are your forgotten consumer. We spend so much time thinking about the external piece, who we're going to sell, how much to, what, when, where, and why. Stop and say, if I post this, what would someone who works here think about it?
Well, that brings up a really interesting point. And this is why I think marketing folks make great kind of internal marketing folks, which is what HR is or what D&I can be, because there's been, to your point, this focus on the external stakeholder, the market, who I want to buy my product or whatever. But that external brand and your internal brand are really the same thing. They're just different. They're just different sort of sides of like the same membrane or something. You know what I'm saying? And so if those things are in conflict, well, then the whole thing is fake. And, someone told me this recently, but like, a company, a client is never going to love your company unless it's full of people who love that company first. And it has just been again, to your point, it's been such a neglected stakeholder group. And it's like, hey, just, plug yourself into this machine and keep pressing this button. And it's like, well, that's not how anybody works anymore. And with labor mobility being so high, there is such a massive cost of turnover. It's worth the investment to get it right, because if these people can be, advocates for your brand and guardians for your company, the business results are just going to follow. It's inevitable,
Yeah, they will be your fiercest advocates, or they'll set little fires inside your company or externally. We'll go back to the Adidas case not too long ago.
Great point. Yep.
The artist formerly known as Kanye West, anti-Black, anti-Semitic comments. Adidas sat on that for way too long. I talked about that and wrote about it in Adweek. And one of their employees shared on LinkedIn. Post goes viral. She says, I can no longer be silent. Sitting here working for this company. We're still in partnership, have signed on, are paying the artist formerly known as Kanye West. And everyone's silent. It's like, it's not happening.
Yeah. And I mean, talk about a risk. Again, like, it's such a risk. Like, this is not the 1920s anymore, where you could be dumping chemicals and, like, it's not going to get out because no one really has a means to get it out. Everybody can post something on Twitter or anywhere else.
We all have access to a microphone.
Totally.
Every single one of us.
Totally. And so it's worth that authentic pursuit of it. How do we kind of stop this train from going off the tracks? Because, to your point, we're seeing a lot of these positions get deleted, and we're seeing this get, like, to me, overly politicized. I mean, there's nothing about inclusion in my book that is, like, so wild and, like,
it's not. I mean,
bad.
Listen, you need people with conviction, leaders with conviction, saying this is the right thing to do, morally and for the business. We're not going to step away from it. It's so fascinating to me. If you signed a record number of clients this quarter, if you exceeded your revenue targets, if you had amazing cost savings, would you stop doing it?
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't. But when you build it into the infrastructure, it gets really difficult. Like all the examples I gave, you're like, oh, you're going to fire the chief diversity officer? Well, then who's going to help with all these people processes and products? Because a real chief diversity officer, and I'm going to say real, meaning the company has set this person up for success. They've got budget, team, and resources, and they are also an internal thought leader and consultant. They're actually it's like the spider web. They're everywhere. I mean, I have like 1,000 bosses. It's not my founder CEO. I report to every person in the company, right? That's how I view my job. Mm-hmm. And so when you do that, it's really hard to then say this role doesn't matter.
Yeah, and it's really sad for those people whose jobs are getting deleted, because anybody who gets that job, I'll just say anybody that I've met who's taken one of those jobs, they want to change the world. They want to make the world a better place. They want to, fix these things. And I'm sure when they got that job, or that job was advertised to them, it painted like this great picture. And then they get in there and then they're pushing a rock up the hill and they can't drive any change. And it's just this kind of like bumper sticker on the car.
There's no budget. There's no team.
Yeah, it's not part of the engine. You know what I'm saying? It's not a piston in the engine. It's just an accoutrement or something,
Yes, absolutely.
Well, this was so fun. You are the coolest.
So
Real quick, what piece of advice do you wish you had? Let's go in the time machine. Find a young Mita. What piece of advice do you wish you had sooner in your career? And you can't say any of the ones that you've already talked about. That's the rule.
Oh, I don't think I said this before. If I did, you can.
We'll delete it.
Have me rewind.
No, I'm kidding.
Have me rewind. I posted this on LinkedIn recently, since you enjoy my LinkedIn posts. Oh, a letter to my younger self. Leave that toxic workplace sooner than you did. Watch for the signs. Nobody deserves to have pieces of themselves chipped away at. And so that doesn't mean we can all afford to just quit and walk out. Just start making the steps. Where there's smoke, there's fire.
Totally.
It's not going to get better. And sometimes you have to realize, I wish when I was probably more optimistic and younger in my career, that I didn't have the power and privilege to make those changes.
Right.
And so sometimes you have to put yourself first.
That's great advice. I mean, I've rarely pulled I've rarely pulled what looks like to be a weed in my garden that didn't turn out to be a weed. You know what I'm saying? And
oh, I love that. Oh,
yeah.
Yep.
And there's not really many like abusive relationships that end up kind of turning around. You got to get out. You know what I'm saying? That's great advice. Yeah. All right, so everybody, pick this book up, Reimagine Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths. We're going to be giving this away on our next Ethics Verse. We have a weekly webinar series, so we'll be giving this away, and we'll add it to the Ethico library. Really great to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much of your day with us.
Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for reading the book. Time is a precious commodity. I appreciate you.
Well,
Thank you.
it's worth a read, and I just can't wait to read those unreleased novels. So let's see what we can do
that's
about
my
those.
next. I'll be on next time talking about that. Thanks so much.
See you next time. Bye-bye.